All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Before we get started, we want to go over a couple logistical items. And the first thing I'd like to do is introduce our Spanish interpreter, Marcela, who's going to provide some explanation and instructions about our bilingual Spanish resources that we have available tonight. So, Marcela.
Thank you so much, Andy. Bienvenidos, buenas tardes y muchas gracias por acompañarnos hoy. Antes de empezar, vamos a explicar las funciones necesarias para acceder a la interpretación simultánea al español. Si están utilizando su computadora portátil o computadora de escritorio, van a ver el icono con figura de globo o el mundo terráqueo al inferior de su pantalla. Cuando aparezca, pulsen Language Interpretation y luego van a escoger Spanish. Y una vez que escojan Spanish, se va a pasar al idioma de español, donde ya pueden escuchar todo simultáneamente. Y welcome everyone and good evening. If you wish to hear the presentation in English, you also have the option of just clicking English when you are able to, and that way you can listen to the Spanish, to the English interpretation of any Spanish questions that may come up as well. Thank you so much, Andy.
All right, thank you, Maricela. So good. So I want to also review a couple other functions here that we'll be using tonight, or particularly to make sure all of you have the opportunity to ask questions and offer your comments. And first is the Zoom chat feature. We really appreciate your use of the chat. It's a great way for everyone to see each other's comments through the chat and questions, but at the same time, it also helps us to literally record immediately when you have those comments. So definitely encourage you to do that, please. But we also have available for anyone who'd like to speak over the audio, we have that feature as well. We have the Zoom raise hand feature, and you can signal that. And I believe it's on your, yeah, so you can signal that, and we'll call on you during the community question and answer and discussion period, and we'll be able to unmute you so that you can speak over the audio and ask any questions or comments. If you have any challenge using the raise hand feature, you're also welcome. Just tell us in the chat that you'd like to speak over the audio. So, and for those of you who are on a smartphone device this evening, you can find the chat and the raise hand function by touching the two or three dot button down at the bottom right corner of your screen, and that should pop up the chat and raise hand feature to be able to do that, to join us in that way and provide your comments. So with that, let me get more formally into the presentation. Thank you again for being here tonight. We greatly appreciate this great turnout here to learn more about the regional decarbonization framework that's under development by the County of San Diego in partnership with many other entities, other public agencies, private interests contributing to this effort. It's been a great process so far. So thank you all for staying involved and engaged with us in this effort. We have a multi-tiered engagement process, as many of you know. So this is one of a series of community meetings that are being held approximately monthly for about 6 months. And this is the second community meeting. And tonight we're going to be focusing closely on the in-depth local policy analysis that's been developed and conducted so far. So that's our main topic for tonight. Before we get into that, we'll hear an overview presentation from Elise Hansen with the Land Use and Environment Group and part of the RDF team. She's going to give the basics of the regional decarbonization framework, the purpose and objectives, and the process. So those of you who've participated in these meetings so far, that will be similar information that you've seen before. And then after Elise, we're privileged to have Scott Anders here from the EPIC team, part of the consulting team that the county has brought on board to help develop the technical aspects of RDF. And specifically, again, he's going to review the methodology and the results from the local policy analysis. So we have pretty extensive presentations. I do want you to know that up front. I think between Elise and Scott, we may go as long as 45 straight minutes with presentations. So I'd like you to be aware of that. But then again, we have the balance of the meeting tonight to hear your thoughts and respond to your questions as best as the team can tonight. And we actually have a number of questions that we want to pose to you as well, just to help kind of spur discussion and get your insights and start to understand what's most important to you when it comes to the kind of the local policy opportunities in our region overall. So that's going to be our format tonight. So I want to thank you in advance for your patience and listening to our presenters straight through for quite a spell here. But then again, we'll open up for the majority of our time to hear from all of you as we go. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce Elise Hansen. She is with the Land Use and Environment Group with the County of San Diego. And she's going to provide the overview presentation of RDF before we bring on Scott. So Elise.
Awesome. Thank you, Andy. Good evening. I'm Elise Hansen, and I'm a Management Fellow in the Land Use and Environment Group, or LUJA's Executive Office. I was a chapter co-author for the technical report and was able to utilize my background in ecology and environmental policy as a part of this larger project. And I'm excited to be in this role with the county team to continue working on regional decarbonization. So before we begin discussing the framework, we want to start by recognizing that there are communities in the San Diego region that face unjust conditions and circumstances related to the environments in which they live. The tribal nations of the San Diego region are an example of one community that has historically faced such impacts. We would like to recognize those injustices with a land acknowledgement from our team. We acknowledge the harmony that existed between the land, nature, and its original peoples, who have since endured displacement, persecution, and systemic oppression. We pay our respect to the unceded territory and the homelands of the 17 tribal nations in our region, the most of any county in the United States, from 4 cultural groups: the Kumeyaay, Diegueño, the Luiseño, the Cupeño, and the Kuya. As climate change increasingly threatens the region, its peoples, and its cultural identities, we aspire to learn from Indigenous traditional knowledge in undoing the injustices of the past. Recognizing the need for a regional approach to addressing climate change, in January last year, the Board of Supervisors voted to create a regional decarbonization framework. This framework is intended to provide science-based pathways to inform policymaking in the regional, county, and city governments towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the San Diego region. It is separate from, but complements, ongoing climate action planning efforts by local governments. The framework is a visionary document being developed collaboratively through public-private partnerships and community input, and will provide strategies and initiatives to move towards zero carbon emissions in the region. So let's start with the basics. What is decarbonization? Simply put, decarbonization is about reducing the total heat-trapping gases that are emitted into the atmosphere. We all have seen and felt the impacts of the planet overheating in terms of prolonged and more frequent extreme heat events, wildfires, droughts, and flooding. The goal of decarbonization is ultimately to achieve a balance in the carbon cycle in nature. That is our measure of success. It is also important to note that decarbonization can have additional health, environmental, and economic benefits or co-benefits, such as improved air and water quality and high-quality green jobs. We will be exploring co-benefits as well in this process. We want to begin with the 3 guiding principles that drove this project from the start. The first principle was to use a data-driven approach so that we can all objectively gauge where we are and where we want to be. Our second principle is that our vision would be guided by input from the public, including business groups, labor groups, environmental advocates, Native American tribes, and communities across the region. We are going to be using a broad range of both traditional as well as virtual tools for community engagement. Finally, our third principle is that we are all in this together. We want to identify the additional role that the county can play in both supporting and convening public agencies, cities and regional authorities, and tribal governments, and in collaborating to attract state and federal resources for climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. Now, based on these 3 principles of data, outreach, and collaboration, we derived 3 components of what we call an integrated regional decarbonization framework. Here are the 3 components. First, the technical report that was prepared by UC San Diego and some of the nation's leading experts on energy modeling. Second, a workforce development study by Inclusive Economics to ensure that our local workers benefit from climate investments. And third, implementation pathways. While there will be many studies, discussions, and recommendations throughout this process, actual decarbonization results will come from the implementation of policies, programs, and projects by all of us working together. Here's our timeline. We began the modeling work last summer and released an initial draft of the technical report in the fall, after which we went to the board, took public comments, and had a technical working group provide an extensive review. The report authors then revised the drafts in response to the comments. Since then, we have received a revised draft of the technical report and a draft of the workforce report. With these, we now have an understanding of where we are as a region, and we are beginning the process of implementation design. From now through August, we will continue to work on the workforce development study and the implementation pathways. Finally, we intend to present the integrated regional decarbonization framework with all three of the components I described earlier to the board for approval. The final fully integrated framework is intended to help policymakers identify opportunities for collaboration across sectors and jurisdictional boundaries. Prior to going to the board, we will be holding public outreach events like this one. Our public outreach will be organized into 6 categories to engage every community, public, and private stakeholder, to meet them where they are, to use their time wisely, and to provide them an experience that is tailored to their needs. These events include community meetings like this one. These will be large public meetings occurring monthly with the intent to engage and educate the general public. Sector workshops. These workshops are intended to provide stakeholders an opportunity to engage in a more detailed dialogue with subject matter experts. 4 of the workshops will be in April, one per week, each focusing on a key sector: energy, land and agriculture, transportation, and buildings. And then another one will be in May, focusing on jobs. Speaker series. This is intended to engage different types of audiences across the region. Guest speakers, selected based on their national reputation, would be encouraged to spark new ideas and explain old concepts in a different way so that we can all learn together. Direct engagement meetings and presentations. We are having regular meetings with cities and agencies, along with individual presentations to elected bodies, tribal governments, as well as interested stakeholder groups. Pop-up community events. These will include various opportunities to engage a general audience on the integrated framework, decarbonization, and the county's role in both. Regional convenings for implementation. These will be events with public officials and stakeholders with the goal of informing the audience of the implementation pathways. These will occur in summer and fall. We are excited to share that Luge is piloting a new engagement tool. Next slide, Andy. With this new platform, the public can learn about the project, ask questions, and review and comment directly on the draft integrated framework. This platform will guide the comment process through May 31st. The technical report was authored by a team led by the University of California, San Diego School of Global Policy and Strategy, working in collaboration with the Energy Policy Initiative Center, or EPIC, at the University of San Diego School of Law, and other consultants with technical expertise in different sectors. The framework's technical report provides quantitative pathways to decarbonization that model the entire region as a system under 4 decarbonization pathways. The technical report's analyses are based on proven technologies and on emerging best practices from across the nation and the world in the areas of buildings, transportation, electricity, and land use. These are our baseline assessments for our regional emissions. Some of the key takeaways for each of the sectors in the technical report are as follows. First, the geospatial analysis of energy siting shows that the region has sufficient available land area for utility-scale wind and solar generation to approach a fully decarbonized energy system, but that there will be trade-offs associated with large-scale regional energy generation. Second, the transportation analysis shows that projected annual emissions through mid-century under current transportation emissions reduction strategies are inconsistent with the levels of reductions required under the governor's executive orders, and that there are opportunities to further reduce these emissions. Third, the building analysis focuses on building electrification and shows that replacing end-of-life fossil fuel heating systems with electrified systems is a near-term priority because some heating systems will only turn over once through 2050. And fourth, the land use and natural climate solutions analysis shows that the San Diego region can effectively and inexpensively sequester and store carbon dioxide through protecting natural and working lands and avoiding land use change. With that, I will now introduce Scott Anders, the Director of the Energy Policy Initiative Center at the University of San Diego and one of the authors of Chapter 8 of the technical report.
Great, thank you so much, Elise. I really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for joining us here, taking some time out of your evening to hear about this important project. So I'm going to be presenting high-level findings of our analysis of local policy opportunities. So before I get started, I would like to acknowledge the work of my colleagues at EPIC. Our team has legal, technical, and policy experts with significant experience working on energy and climate policy in the San Diego region and at the state level. And we have two EPIC staff members, Nilmini Silva-Send and Joe Cates, on the line here today. So when we get to the Q&A, we might be able to hear from them as well if we get some questions. Next slide. Next slide, Andy. You can skip that one. So the next slides provide a brief overview of our project approach. They basically summarize what we did. We conducted 3 separate but related analyses for this project. First, we reviewed the legal and regulatory authority of local jurisdictions to act to influence or to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. Next, we reviewed all the climate action plans in the region to understand similarities and differences. This analysis looked at how often certain measures are included, the reductions from each category of measures, and whether and how social equity considerations were included. The basic purpose of this review was not to rank or score climate action plans or any specific measures, but rather to take a regional view of all climate action plans. And then finally, we estimated the greenhouse gas impact of all the climate action plans in the region. And the purpose of this analysis was to understand the amount of greenhouse gas reductions that could result from the commitments in all caps. This provides a more regional perspective of greenhouse gas reductions. We focused on climate action plans because they represent the greenhouse gas reduction commitments of a local jurisdiction deemed reasonable at the time of adoption. Also, caps are often mitigation for general plan updates, and in this way can be considered enforceable. Next slide. We also did a more detailed analysis looking at the 4 decarbonization pathways that Elise talked about and also identified in the chapters of the technical report. These include decarbonizing the electric supply, buildings, transportation, and then we also looked at natural climate solutions, which also includes agriculture. And just for those of you who kind of follow these things, the natural climate solutions category is consistent with what the state of California calls natural and working lands. And based on all this, we identify opportunities for further local action to reduce emissions and for regional collaboration. And it's a subtle point, but we identified opportunities based on our analysis. These are not necessarily recommendations, but rather possible actions that local governments could take. We recognize that each local jurisdiction has a separate set of circumstances to consider when they're looking at measures like these and would need to evaluate which opportunities are appropriate. You can think of the opportunities as a menu of options rather than a preferred list of actions. As I mentioned, our chapter is structured in part based on the 4 decarbonization pathways identified in the other chapters of the technical report. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, there we go. We broke down the 4 main decarbonization pathways into policy categories, which represent the main ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. For example, within the transportation pathway, there are 3 main methods to reduce emissions. You can reduce vehicle miles traveled, you can use less fuel, and you can use cleaner fuel, including electric vehicles. Policy categories were further broken down into subcategories. These are based on our review of climate action plans and provide more specificity. For example, there are several ways to reduce VMT, including increasing the miles of bike lanes in the jurisdiction, increasing density to encourage mass transit, or reducing parking requirements for developers. We have a detailed breakdown like this for the other 3 decarbonization pathways for buildings, electricity, and natural climate solutions. And this framework serves as the basic structure for our analysis and our report. And it also could help serve as a general framework for a climate action plan. Our analysis includes 17 adopted and pending caps. Pending caps are those substantially complete but not yet adopted. We include the 2018 County of San Diego Climate Action Plan and consider it as an adopted cap for purposes of our analysis. The City of National City cap is not included because it has a target year of 2020. And while the City of San Diego's 2015 cap is included, its updated pending 2020 Climate Action Plan, which was released too late to be included in our analysis, is not included. The City of Poway is the only jurisdiction in the region that has not begun activity to develop a cap. And note that this analysis was a snapshot in time and captured those that were in place or pending at the time of analysis. And we recognize that this is a living document and that can be revised to include climate action plan updates, including both for the City of San Diego and the County of San Diego. So I'm going to provide a brief summary of the findings in each of the 3 analyses that we completed for the project. First is our analysis of authority of local jurisdictions to act. For this, we reviewed authority of local jurisdictions to influence or regulate greenhouse gas emissions. This included a review of the California Constitution, state statutes, regulations, and agencies. And where appropriate, we looked at the local, state, and federal levels. As an example, the federal government adopts regulations for appliances like water heaters. This can affect the local jurisdictions to regulate their use. So these are there's a relationship between the different levels of regulation and authority. So the key takeaways of this analysis is that local jurisdictions do in fact have authority to influence and regulate emissions. This authority is from 2 sources. One is broad constitutionally derived authority related to health, safety, and general welfare. And this authority comes with the primacy over land use, meaning that local governments have sole jurisdiction over land use, or at least primacy on that authority. They also have delegated authority under state or federal law, and some authority is subject to state and federal preemption, like the appliance example I used just a minute ago. And the full extent of constitutional authority is not clear. As an example, there was the City of Berkeley has adopted an ordinance to ban natural gas in new construction, and that ordinance has been challenged in court and is pending in the 9th Circuit. And this resolution of this case will help us understand a little bit more maybe what the edges of this authority are. And based on our analysis of climate action plans, local jurisdictions are not exercising their full authority, and there are additional opportunities using known authority to act locally in all pathways that we looked at. And we acknowledge that the natural climate solution pathway is relatively it's relatively new, and we require some more analysis to understand what the options are. And there is an opportunity to accelerate state and federal efforts using this authority. The second analysis we conducted was a review of climate action plans in the region. This is a factual representation of the climate action plans to determine similarities and differences among caps. As I mentioned earlier, we did not evaluate or rank any caps or any specific measures. I'll discuss this later in the presentation, but it's not advisable to add up the greenhouse gas emissions across caps, which we didn't do, and I'll explain that in a future slide. but we did use our climate action plan database to compare numerous factors, including what year the cap would be updated, what targets were included, what were the implementation mechanisms used, like requirements, education, or incentives. And we also categorized all climate action plan measures into the decarbonization pathways listed here. And we also created this framework of the policy categories and subcategories to kind of organize all climate action plans for our analysis. We also looked at how often climate action plan measures are used, and we looked at where reductions come from in climate action plans. And based on our review, we have several key takeaways. So 8 climate action plans are scheduled to be updated between the year 2021 and 2025. No adopted or pending cap has a net zero greenhouse gas emissions target. Again, we did not include the pending City of San Diego Climate Action Plan update. Greenhouse gas impact of the decarbonization pathways vary across all climate action plans. So some climate action plans have more from transportation or electricity or buildings. It varies across climate action plans. And the reductions in climate action plans are not always proportionate to emissions. So as an example, decarbonizing electricity represents about 45% of the reductions that we see in climate action plans, but the emissions from that sector only represent about 20%. Similarly, for off-road, it's the opposite. On-road transportation represents about 30% of reductions, but accounts for about 45% of emissions. And there's a wide range of implementation mechanisms and combinations of those mechanisms, including education, outreach, and collaboration, financial incentives, and financing plans and programs and requirements. We also conducted a preliminary analysis of social equity in climate action plans. In general, we found that the integration of social equity is limited, inconsistent, and lacks specificity. And there's no standard definition of equity in climate action plans. So there are several key findings in this regard, several opportunities. One is an opportunity to include social equity across the entire climate action planning cycle. So an example we give is shade trees. So on the right-hand side of your slide, you see kind of a generic, this is the climate action planning cycle. The first step is to develop and maintain a climate action plan. So at that phase, for shade trees, for example, an analysis could be done to understand where trees are and where trees aren't in a given jurisdiction, and where there are opportunities to plant trees in communities of concern. So doing some analysis on at the front end of the process, also targeting some implementation at communities of concern, that can also be part of the process, and then specifically monitor and reporting progress in those areas. So there's an opportunity across the entire climate planning cycle to incorporate social equity. There's also an opportunity for regional support and guidance for smaller jurisdictions. There's also some guidance documents around climate action planning for many other aspects of climate action planning, but not for equity. There's also a need for regional social equity data and indicators, and regular reporting on these issues. The final analysis we conducted was a scenario analysis to estimate the greenhouse gas impacts of all climate action plans. While the review of climate action plans that I presented previously compares kind of across caps, the scenario analysis is intended to estimate the combined greenhouse gas impacts from all climate action plan commitments. As I mentioned earlier, it's problematic to add up all the greenhouse gas values in climate action plans because differences exist in data and methods used, target years, and assumptions about state and federal methods. So we developed a method to estimate the combined greenhouse gas impacts that avoided this challenge. And just to kind of say a little bit more about this analysis is it only considers greenhouse gas emissions. So in the other analysis, we looked at many other factors. So we're only looking at emissions in this scenario analysis, and it's only a subset of emissions. I saw some comments in the chat about methane and some other gases. This first part of this, the technical analysis in any case, focused on on-road transportation, electricity, and natural gas, basically buildings, transportation, and electric supply. So our study did the same, And I think there's an opportunity to expand that out. But for the purposes of tonight, we're going to stick to that that subset of emissions. So again, when we look at the subsequent slides here, this is not all emissions, but it's most. What we did is we looked at every single climate action plan, and we looked at the commitments that were made, and we looked at the specific indicators or specific activity levels. And so, for example, we looked at the VMT reductions from all climate action plans, and we added up the miles, and then we calculated the greenhouse gas impacts using those activities. So we were using the exact same method across all miles, and we eliminated inconsistencies in that way. So this chart shows kind of the results of the overall results of our analysis. And the black line on this chart shows the expected level emissions from the three categories we talked about after we take away state and federal impact. So the black line is what we call in this case the reference scenario, but we're already accounting for state and federal policies and impacts. The upper dashed line shows the combined impact of the current cap commitments. As shown in the figure, the current commitments represent a relatively small portion of the amount of reductions needed to reach net zero by 2035, the most common target year, represented by the vertical orange line. For this analysis, we did not assess whether any individual cap meets its target. We also assume that all commitments will be implemented and greenhouse gas targets realized. The lower dashed line shows the greenhouse gas impacts of applying the best cap commitments to every jurisdiction. So basically, we looked at all the climate action plans in a given area. We decided which category had the most aggressive measure, and then we applied that measure to every jurisdiction in the region. So this can be kind of seen as an upper limit on the current cap commitments that we have in the region today. And even applying these best commitments, significant emissions would need to be addressed to reach net zero. And this helps put into perspective the magnitude of the challenge of reaching net zero, particularly from a regional perspective. These charts show the emission impacts of each of the 4 decarbonization pathways. The chart on the left shows the current cap commitments. Decarbonizing the electric supply has the highest impact. This represents commitments to reach 100% carbon-free, mostly through community choice aggregation programs, but among other things too. Also note that the orange wedge related to renewable electricity disappears in 2045. This is because the state law requires 100% carbon-free supply and no additional greenhouse gas reductions would be available after that. At least we assume that in the analysis. The chart on the right shows the impact of the best cap commitments. Note that the dark orange wedge is bigger but still disappears in 2045. The decarbonization wedge has the largest greenhouse gas impact in this scenario, and greenhouse gas impacts from buildings and natural climate solutions are also larger. But the region would still have significant remaining emissions. Go ahead. Yeah, well, let's go ahead and we'll go to the next one here. So this chart shows the emissions that would remain after we accounted for the cap scenarios. And you can see that in both cases, the amount of emissions remaining come from natural gas, very little or none from electricity after that, and then it's the transportation sector. So this is good. This gives us a clue about what additional measures would be needed for us to get to net zero emissions, at least in the scenario we looked at here. So the final slides here, I'm going to go through. Oh, sorry. This is the key takeaways from the scenario analysis. In fact, I covered most of these. So in the interest of time, Andy, let's skip this one. And this next portion, we look at the kind of the key takeaways or the opportunities in each of the pathways. So we'll take it one by one. So the first pathway, the transportation pathway, is the largest source of emissions. It also, the analysis on our report is very extensive, and we gave it a little bit more real estate in the presentation. So just real quick to go through these are the opportunities that we identified for local jurisdictions in our region. So and we broke these down into those categories that I talked about earlier to kind of organize them just a bit. So for reducing vehicle miles traveled, opportunities exist in the areas of promoting mass transit, increasing bike and walk infrastructure, increasing connectivity through land use changes, and managing transportation demand. From the aspect of decreasing fuel use, there's an opportunity to expand efforts to calm traffic, like roundabouts or traffic signal synchronization, anti-idling, and accelerating vehicle retirement. So getting less efficient cars off the road. So in the area of increasing alternative fuels and alternative fuel vehicles, there is an opportunity to increase the use of these technologies in municipal fleets and to assess the equity trade-offs between zero-emission vehicles and mass transit, to assess the use of low-carbon fuel standard funding to promote these technologies, and to develop a regional zero-emission vehicle implementation plan to meet state targets. For those of you who follow this particular area, there is an effort underway in San Diego called the Accelerate to Zero project, and they're starting on a pathway for this zero-emission implementation plan. We also looked at opportunities for regional collaboration. And so in the areas of transportation, we think there's an opportunity to assess system efficiency and improvements on a regional basis. So in other words, if you have traffic signal retiming in one jurisdiction but not in the next jurisdiction, what are the implications of that? If we had a more synchronized system that went beyond local jurisdictions, could that make a difference? So we also believe there's an opportunity to explore expanding regional mechanisms like programs through community choice or other JPAs, for example, to support uptake of electric vehicles, and also around social equity, which is a theme you'll hear throughout all of these key takeaways. So for decarbonizing buildings, there is an opportunity to decarbonize new buildings with local ordinances. We have several in our region, many around the state, and this is something that could be done relatively quickly, though it has a relatively small impact on greenhouse gas emissions. By far the biggest gap I would say in our decarbonizing building pathway is decarbonizing existing buildings. So there are opportunities for policies, again, targeted to existing buildings around auditing, benchmarking, and disclosure of energy use or of carbon emissions. There's an opportunity to encourage efficiency and or electrification, so we can have building performance standards. And there's also opportunity for programs like retro commissioning or building tune-ups to reduce emissions in buildings. And you see on the right there, we estimate that 80% of the buildings that will exist in 2050 already exist today. So again, this is where the heavy lift will occur when it comes to the building sector. We think there's an opportunity to continue decarbonizing municipal facilities. Local governments have done many projects, but there could be more. And again, we looked at this regional opportunity, and so we believe there's an opportunity for regional support of building decarbonization. So more of a regional scope of policy development and implementation, technical support, regional data analysis, many more. Happy to talk in the Q&A about this or any of this. And we think that there is also, again, a need for regional capacity and tools to assess the social equity considerations. So on the electric supply side, we think there's an opportunity to increase carbon-free grid supply. We have a state law. Community choice aggregations are accelerating the content of renewable electricity. More jurisdictions can join the current CCA programs, which have a higher average content, and jurisdictions can commit to 100% carbon-free for default service for their community and for their municipal accounts. There's also an opportunity to increase customer-side supply. So these policy opportunities include requiring solar for new and existing buildings in some cases, programs by CCAs or others to encourage customer-side projects via net metering or financial incentives, to encourage solar plus storage projects. And again, an equity lens here. There is additional work needed to make access to renewable electricity more equitable. This could include incentives, financing. We also think that there's an opportunity to increase the grid supply of 100% carbon-free to communities of concern. and we have some thoughts on how we might do that. Okay, final slide, natural climate solutions. Some opportunities that we've identified, for example, is a regional analysis to identify suitable tree planting locations, considering many factors like social equity, continuing to develop and integrate state and local research on carbon valuation. There's been some really great work done in our region to better understand the carbon, how much carbon is stored in our landscapes and our ecosystems, and it's a more locally relevant set of rates and data. And so we think we can continue to improve those estimates, do more regular estimates. We think that there's an opportunity to do a regional analysis to identify land for conservation, preservation, and restoration projects, and to develop and regularly update a regional carbon stock inventory, as I kind of alluded to in my second bullet. So I know that was a lot to get through, but important to kind of set the baseline for the discussion. I'm happy to unpack any and all of this. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a couple other EPIC staff on the line if questions come up for their expertise.
All right, Scott, thank you very much for that. We're going to do a quick switch of our screen share here. If you can bear with us for one moment, we're going to take care of this. All right, so again, I want to thank Elise Hansen and Scott Anders for the extensive presentations. Thank you all for your patience in listening through them. A lot of great, amazing information. And for those of you who joined kind of midway or during the presentation, to clarify, this evening's meeting is focused on the local policy analysis that's been conducted thus far. This is what you've just heard is not the complete regional decarbonization framework analysis. There's been a lot that's underway and available. So tonight's focused on that analysis that Scott just reviewed. So we thank him for that. And again, thanks to Elise for the upfront presentation, again, reminding about the purpose of the RDF and the work we're going through these days. So indeed, we do want to move into hearing from the rest of you. We have until as late as 8 o'clock tonight to do that. And just as a reminder, the best ways to do that are through the Zoom chat. Thanks to those of you who've been using that already to share ideas and comments. We appreciate everybody being really direct and civil in that, but also for providing some questions. We're tracking those and we're going to be responding shortly. So I want to remind that about the chat and the raise hand feature if you'd like to speak over the audio. And also, again, those of you who might be on a smartphone, you probably find the chat and the raise hand feature using the kind of 3-dot button if you don't see it already. So I want to make sure you see that. So a couple things first I wanted to offer. I know we had some questions specifically in the chat. Just to clarify, there were some questions about social equity data as part of the data collection effort in CAPS. To our team's knowledge at this point, equity, and I think Scott Anders spoke to this, it's not really uniformly studied or addressed or even defined across climate action plans so far, and the ones that have been analyzed. So health is probably not heavily included in terms of the level of measurable indicators, but in the regional decarbonization framework, all chapters certainly thus far are considering health impacts as co-benefits. But level of quantification, is still can be further developed. There has been also some clarifying questions about whether or not, the level of natural gas be included in this analysis. And it is definitely the focus of the analysis of decarbonization, because the result of natural gas combustion is carbon dioxide or CO2. And the team has not considered methane leaks from other aspects of natural gas, like those that occur during production in piping gas. Natural gas is the key aspect for decarbonization of buildings. It's been really foundational to this study. So I wanted to give at least couple initial responses to questions that have come in the chat so far. And Vanessa, we'll definitely give you some more specifics about what is being collected regarding health impact. Again, I think the short answer is not much, but we'll have team members come on shortly to give a little more information. But we'd love to hear from you about what health impact data you think is going to be important to include as we further analyze and study climate action plans and decarbonization overall. So very good. So let's move in. So first thing I want to do, so in addition to, I see a couple hands raised, we're definitely going to come to, I see Craig Jones and Mike Bullock. Thank you both for being here again. Before we go to the raised hands, I do want to introduce two Zoom polls here. In a moment, we're going to pop up the Zoom poll. I think many of you are familiar with that. We just want to kind of start off we're going to start getting some thoughts from you about building decarbonization. So Scott Anders just talked about these pathways, right? The sectors we've been looking at. We just want to get some response and thought from you about building decarbonization. We have two initial polling questions we want to run by you. As you see the first one here, we just want to kind of get a sense from you which building decarbonization tools are going to be most important for local action. And we see local action, we mean a local jurisdiction, you know, a city, a county, government, most likely, perhaps a port, for example. So those are the questions. We'll go ahead and put the Zoom poll up now. You should see that just any second here on your screen. And we're allowing you to pick as many as you like, but definitely, you know, hone in on the ones that you think are most kind of critical, most important for local action that you would prioritize, but you're allowed to choose multiple. So, all right, they're coming through here. Thank you for participating. All right, about half of you have weighed in. Very good. Keep them coming. And good, about 2/3 of you have weighed in. Let's go ahead and just take a quick look at the results. Again, we use this polling tool just to kind of help all of us just kind of spur discussion and get a sense, as we say, take the pulse of the group, if you will, here. Certainly not scientific, but so financial incentives, things like rebates seem to be of interest to many of you. But again, those local requirements, ordinances still rise up there, financing, broader education, and other. Yes, please tell us in the chat, please, those of you who chose other, what does that mean for you? What are other building decarbonization tools for local action? So please let us know. But let me introduce one other polling question quickly here, just to further round out the building decarbonization perspective. And excuse me one second here. So to give you the preview, here it is. So this one, we are going to ask you to just pick one, just for a start, just to make it challenging here for the sake of conversation. Which of these is most important to advance existing building electrification? So I think you may recall Scott spoke to the fact that in 2050, 80% of the buildings, Scott, you can come in and correct me if I'm wrong here, 80% of buildings anticipated to be standing in 2050 are those that are here today. So new building development is not going to it's not anticipated to completely turn over our building stock by 2050. So it's with that, the focus, why we have the focus question on existing building decarbonization. So you see the answers there about, you know, collecting existing building data, developing tools like mapping, expanding the amount of funding available to subsidize the equipment and installation, enhancing the staff capacity of local jurisdictions to help make that work and happen, educating decision makers, educating the public, other. So we'll go ahead and put the polling question up now. Go ahead and weigh in. We're challenging you to pick your top one. We just want to know from your perspective, what do you think what's most important to do here if you had to pick one? And yeah, I do want to, you know, qualify this. This isn't about just choose one solution and leave the others behind. We just again, taking the pulse of the group here, seeing what's really rising to the top for you as most critical overall. Okay, good. About half of you weighed in. Keep them coming. Good, good, good. All right, that's about 2/3 of you. Good. Let's go ahead and take a look at the results here. All right, so expanding the amount of funding available to subsidize equipment and installation really rose up for many of you. But yeah, we see a few of you touching on the other ones and a few of you on the other side of things. Do let us know in the chat, you know, what you meant by other. So good. Would love to hear from you all. Continuing on with this building decarbonization pathway for the moment. Like to hear from you about your thoughts on that, expanding on that. And we'll go to the raised hands here over audio. And Craig Jones, you should be able to unmute yourself. And what are your thoughts about building decarbonization, Craig? What's resonating for you?
Well, in my mind, building decarbonization means stopping using natural gas,
Okay.
Which is a significant creator of CO2, but also, you know, our industries being dependent on natural gas means there's a lot of methane leakage, which is a substantial greenhouse gas climate change maker. So, it's interesting in Zoom question 2, I'm not sure exactly what you were trying to get at, but clearly the first and primary thing to do is to require all new buildings to be gas-free and to subsidize as much as possible the retrofit of existing buildings.
Okay, very good. And yeah, we're starting to see emerging policy in some local areas around, those considerations, restrictions. If not, I think, what was it, Berkeley, for instance, that's banning it outright, new construction. So interesting to see how further local policy development occurs in those areas. So Craig, thanks for that. Look forward to hearing from you on the other pathways, as we call them, in a little bit. Let's bring on, let's see, Mike Bullock. Thanks for coming back. Good to see you. What are your thoughts here? You should be able, hang on, Mike, 1 second. Yeah, go ahead. You can unmute. Your thoughts on building decarbonization specifically. What's emerging? What's resonating for you?
Yeah, requirements. You need every and how fast do we need to electrify the buildings? I think buildings are an important category of greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore, how fast is pretty obviously what's required to achieve our first occurring climate stabilization requirement, which happens to be in 2030. That's why it really disappoints me that you picked 2035 out of the air when the United Nations has made it very clear, COP26, over and over again, they talk about 2030, and that is our first requirement, and it's a large reduction. So you look at the buildings we have, and you look at what we have to achieve, and then you require accordingly. And I'll tell you why, because human survival requires climate stabilization, and human survival is an important thing to achieve. It's unthinkable that we don't acknowledge that right up front, and we don't use that to quantify how fast we have to do things, because physics is physics. It's in a sense, it doesn't care about our problems. It is just plain physics. And the climate scientists have told us what the physics is. And we should be very clear about what climate destabilization is, where things take off to where we have no more control. Okay. So yeah, requirements is the main thing, because we can't fool around. We can't incentivize, we can't beg, we can't hope, and we can't educate, and we can't just, we have to have requirements, because human survival is that important.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. Yeah. And thank you. I know you've been adamant about the time frame and the horizon in many of these meetings, and I know you share those tonight. So thank you for that. So let's see, I see Frank Landis. You should be able to unmute yourself now. Frank, do you have specific thoughts on building decarbonization? It's kind of this area.
Yeah, I do. And I mean, my big thought is that we should prioritize retrofitting over new building. And I'm going to explain why. And it's going to sound like it's from left field, but it's not. I'm with CNPS, and this I'm not talking about plans here. I'm just talking as a private citizen. But we just commented on the Cottonwood sand mine EIR, which quite honestly is not really important here, except for one small detail that a friend of mine pointed out. And the problem with the Cottonwood sand mine is that it only is the lifetime of the sand mine is only slated for 10 years. And a friend of mine who's worked in the sand mining industry as a consultant has pointed out that's really weird, because usually sand mines are permitted for 50 to 100 years. So if somebody thought that a local sand mine we're so short of building sand, and this is building grade sand for concrete, that it was economic to open a 10-year mine, that sounds like we may be really short of the stuff we need for concrete and cement. And so I don't know that for sure, of course, but I think prudence would demand that we start thinking about how we can retrofit existing buildings more than just ripping everything down and building something new. So that's my comment.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Frank. Yeah, good example of how as we're working through decarbonization and options, these kind of connections among other aspects of our economy, of building infrastructure that are emerging, and that's a another example. So Frank, appreciate that, and what, you sharing your thoughts as to what, that means, and for other considerations. I want to acknowledge a lot of commentary coming to the chat. Thank you all, and appreciate you all kind of sharing ideas and kind of responding to each other civilly, which is always nice. I appreciate that. And I appreciate your comments specifically about making sure there's enough. I see a couple of comments, for instance, making sure there's enough equipment and people to install them, for example. So some acknowledgement that we already have some data collection that does occur about providing data to the government. So we need to be kind of thoughtful about what is being done versus what still needs to be done. So appreciate that. Improving electrical appliances to respond to market pressure. Let's see, and just a lot of good additional comments and perspectives. I really appreciate that. I won't kind of go through all of them per se right now, but I just wanted to acknowledge and note that we're tracking those and recording those. So thank you all for that. Please do share any more additional thoughts about decarbonizing existing buildings here in the chat. I appreciate that. But in the interest of time, let's move on to another pathway that I know many of you continue to be tracking, working with closely, and that's transportation, of course. So next polling question we're going to put up here briefly here. I want you to look at these answer options for the moment. Are where should local governments focus their attention to reduce greenhouse gas or GHG emissions in the transportation sector? So we've got some options here, and as always, we always have the customary other at the end if you feel like there are other choices that should rise to the top. But again, we want to challenge you to pick a top one for the moment. So as you can see here, we got the poll popped up. So it's increasing the number of electric vehicles, increasing EV, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, the percentage of commuters that use public transit, the amount and quality of bike lanes, urban development focused and increasing housing in areas that are already developed, so maybe more infill oriented development, and again, other. So please do let us know if there are other, specific things that you feel local governments should be doing that are, rise in prominence for you beyond these initial option choices. So, all right, so let's see, just about 2/3 of you weighed in. Okay, good. All right, let's go ahead and just take a quick look at what you all weighed in with here. And okay, excellent. So kind of a little bit across the board, a little leaning towards electric vehicles, the infrastructure, the vehicles themselves, public transit, yeah, excellent development patterns, and a number of you with other. Again, let's take a look in the chat for a little more specifics. There, it'd be helpful to see to take a look. So good, and then let me offer again along those lines too. Please do let us your thoughts about other innovative ways for decarbonizing the transportation sector. What else should we be considering? Perhaps there are things that Scott referenced more specifically that you wanted to kind of bring up and suggest. So the number of vehicles, for example, Jim, thank you in the chat. And let's see, EV infrastructure, because as Frank was noting, we don't have great public transit, in Frank's opinion. So another perspective there about the balance of transit versus EV infrastructure, for example. So good, thank you. Brian Shuck, I see your Zoom hand raised. You should be, let me see. Brian, you should be able to unmute. Go ahead. What did you want to relate to when it comes to transportation?
Yeah, I chose
sector?
other because clearly this is an emergency and everyone's moving too slowly. Yes, we need more EVs, but I think one of the greatest incentives that we're not using is to ban emitting vehicles from many places, including the carpool lanes. I think that would really help to accelerate things. And,
Okay.
Obviously parts of cities rather than speed bumps. That's my comment.
Okay, great, Brian. Thank you. Appreciate that. Good. Other thoughts, Craig? I see Craig Jones. I see your hand up. You should be able to unmute. What are your thoughts on the further decarbonizing the transportation sector?
Yeah, as made clear in the presentation, transportation is the single most significant sector in creating greenhouse gases into our environment. So we have to address it aggressively. Electric vehicles, I drive an electric vehicle. I have a 220 volt charger at home. I'm lucky that I can afford to buy an electric vehicle and to have the infrastructure at my house. We need to make the use and availability of electric vehicles much more available to underserved populations. But in any case, it's going to take way too long for the inventory of vehicles on our highways in our region to transfer over to electric. Way too long. We have to change other sectors now, which means we need to make public transportation workable. I see some comments in the chat about how, because of the land use patterns in our region, we have to continue to be dependent on cars. If you really get into the guts of the newly adopted regional transportation plan, if we are aggressive about it, we can have a public transportation system that really captures many more vehicle trips. We need to do that. And it's an equity issue as well. So yeah, we need to, there's no one solution. We have to have really effective, useful public transportation, and we need to prioritize electric vehicles and charging availability to disadvantaged populations.
Very good. Great. Thank you very much. So excellent. Let's see. Mike Bullock, you should be able to unmute. Yeah, your thoughts on the decarbonizing the transportation sector. I know for you, parking requirements have been really of great concern. So maybe a little bit on that or other thoughts?
Yeah. No. I mean, I worked this problem from the top down. I mean, I took the 2030 climate stabilization requirement that we were given by those dadgum scientists who they're heartless. They just give us these numbers and they were really difficult. Now, the good news is it could be done. And I showed two sets of enforceable mitigation measures. One set that has to do with all the cars that are going to be on the road in 2030. So there's quite a bit of work there. I had to think about what we would have in 2030 if we started requirement. We have corporate average fuel efficiency, and we need to require the percentage of electrical vehicles that each manufacturer produces in a given year. So we have control. If we want to use it, we could just throw our hands up. But so there are a set of requirements that have to do with car, with the fleet efficiency. And when I say fleet, I mean
so federal and state level.
But the other set of enforceable measures are to achieve a needed VMT reduction. Per capita VMT is what I specified. And how do you get that? It's difficult. I mean, people have said, yeah, we have sprawl, we don't have good transit, we have, all those things are real. And I had to specify enforceable measures that were real, and that I could actually, we had a dial, if it didn't work out the way we thought it would, we could change. And so it really comes down to pricing to a large degree. Now you, accused me of being obsessed with parking, and many people have done that, and I do look that way. The reason is because we have such terrible car parking systems, and we could do so much better. And I have data. Mainly, it's car parking cash out is what I have. I have data for, what is it? How much how much does driving reduce if you charge, or you have a price differential from the old system to the new system? And that's what cash out has done for me. And so I apologize. I don't know any better way to do it. I mean, and there's actually 5 or 6 things on my table. Now, Scott has no interest in my work, and neither does CARB, and neither does any city, neither does, the interest is where I present papers. Air and Waste Management Association and the other organizations that are looking for papers on climate related issues. And so they look at my stuff and they call me, and we go over all the math. But so they're interested. But no, governments are not, counties not, and so on and so forth. But we could solve this problem. Thank
All
you.
right. Well, thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Appreciate your stick-to-itiveness and being with us in this process. And do encourage you to, still, if you haven't, although I bet you have, just submit that data anyway, please. And our team is here and willing to take a look at it, and we can have some more offline discussions with you. Absolutely. So, so thank you for that. And I wanted to also acknowledge in the chat a lot of good, again, appreciate all of you just offering your thoughts and kind of, back and forth with each other, thinking about, I'm seeing a lot of commentary around public transportation, the entire system, and again, the EV infrastructure and cars and overall. So really appreciate you all weighing those considerations here and sharing your thoughts in that way. Also still seeing some commentary on, again, building decarbonization too. This is, one building is not the same, depending upon the construction and the type of use. And Craig Benedetto, appreciate your comment there as well, that we do need to kind of dig deeper in those types, those uses, and talk about implications and opportunities, when it comes to decarbonizing existing and or new facilities. So we can absolutely look forward to doing that in more detail with you and others overall. So, there's not one size fits all when it comes to decarbonizing existing and or via new construction. So want to acknowledge and appreciate that. So very good. With that, I want to introduce another polling question here. Still want to continue to hear your thoughts around transportation and buildings decarbonization, but now also want to open up and talk a little bit more with you when it comes to equity. And again, I think we've restricted this to just one option. And again, I do want to stress here, it's really for the purpose of facilitating engagement and conversation right now in the moment. But when you look at these options about what's most important for communities of concern or equity, when it comes to decarbonization and climate change, what are your thoughts about specific examples like we see here that you think would be most important overall? And again, I forgive the effort to forgive the constraint with just one choice for the purpose of this poll, but we just want to again as a conversation starter. So we'll go ahead and put this poll question up, and we'll let you respond here. I think this is restricted to just one choice. I think is that correct? I don't know. I guess you'll find out as you get in there. Click away. So. And as your questions are coming, let me just also note too, we're doing pretty well on time. Again, we have until as late as 8 o'clock tonight. We're happy to be here that late, depending upon the comments and questions coming in and the flow. But also let you know too, we want to respect your time as well as we get through the conversation here. If we round things out and everybody's been able to share their ideas and thoughts, we're totally open to wrapping up early tonight as well. So, all right, let's take a look at this poll and quick shot of results. And yeah, it looks like free transportation, reduced cost of free transportation. Those of you, it sounds like kind of really leaning on the public transit side. But again, as we see some ideas across the board, and again, dare I say, just this quick poll of a relatively small number of us, that it does take multiple ideas, multiple opportunities to be able to, and interventions to be able to address equity concerns. So we'd love to hear more from you, and particularly those of you who weighed in the chat. All the above. I love kind of Craig Jones gaming the polling system there, saying all the above. I appreciate that and understand that. And in all seriousness, again, acknowledge it will take multiple options. But are there additional solutions that you see from an equity perspective? And some of those have been brought up here tonight already in the course of talking about building decarbonization and transportation decarbonization. Are there other aspects of equity and that you want to bring to the fore here when we talk about local policy in particular? What should we be thinking about and considering when it comes to equity in decarbonization here at the local level in particular? So yeah, Craig Jones, go ahead, please.
This is an interesting question, and what I'm tempted to reply is that what does continuous engagement from social equity perspective look like? It's a political context, to political climate. So elected officials who make the decisions here, including the Board of Supervisors, need to really hear continuously from underserved populations and those who represent underserved populations. See, I don't think we can get away from the politics. And at the Board of Supervisors, we need to count to at least 3. So the social equity populations need to have that strong voice and need to be encouraged to be provided that strong voice to the elected officials.
Good, appreciate that. I do want to acknowledge too, I appreciate, Craig, you mentioned the Board of Supervisors for the county government, of course, and certainly, you know, as policy recommendations, implementation recommendations come forward in the months and years ahead, they'll tackle that. But also know too, for everybody's benefit and knowledge, the regional decarbonization framework is intended to be collaborative and to encourage policy change at all levels of, you know, all jurisdictions, if you will, within our region, if not informing and advocating at the state and federal levels where that can, where appropriate and necessary. So, so Craig, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate your thoughts there. I've seen comments in the chat as well around equity. You know, thinking about continuous engagement around air pollution, ozone sensors, and data availability in communities of concern, where some of the greatest impacts have been occurring historically and still today. Absolutely, transportation, really a key equity issue. Vanessa, thank you for that comment. When it comes to decarbonizing, not just decarbonizing, but I know many would suggest equity from the perspective of economic benefit, environmental justice, and just simple equal access to things, to everything that makes life livable. So appreciate that as well. So very good. And yeah, a lot of good comments there. I see more back on transportation and building decarbonization. Overall, you're welcome to keep bringing those comments and ideas forward. So I also want to, I'll put another question up just for general discussion here. How else can, specifically with RDF, with this process, as we continue to move forward and explore data, look at potential policies coming forward and ideas, what should we be doing to ensure equity is integrated, you know, in these potential steps that we as a region may be taking, you know, in the months and years ahead? Would definitely want to see more your thoughts there. So, so funding priorities, I see Kendall, thank you in the chat. Kendall, the funding flowing more freely, as Kendall describes, or perhaps targeted to communities of concern, and those policy decisions being grounded, starting with communities of concern. If I'm tracking with you, Kendall, around jobs, the environment, and those communities, thank you for that. Good. Other thoughts around what equity can and should look like in the context of regional decarbonization overall. So. And I wanted to also, while more comments are coming in, I wanted to, Kendall mentioned jobs, and wanted to know for you, we'll talk more about next steps in just a few minutes, but part of this entire analysis through this process and developing the RDF is also looking at workforce development and jobs in the context of if our economy will change significantly from a essentially carbon to decarbon, carbonize to decarbonize, if you will, that has great impact on tremendous impact on our economy and jobs and the workforce. So a jobs analysis is forthcoming around that. So we'll be looking forward to that. So stay tuned for that as well. So housing as well. Jim Pugh's noting here in the chat, appreciate that very much so. And I see, you know, Mike Bullock, the comment here about typically, you know, as habitat and natural disasters occurred, lower income communities, as Mike was describing here, will be some of the first to experience those impacts, if not some of the most difficult impacts. So, so thank you for sharing your thoughts there. Let me, as more comments are coming in, and I appreciate Craig Jones, thank you. So the land use sprawl, as you're describing there, can really change how we investment. If we change development patterns, that can change investment in communities as well. So public capital, utility investment, and jobs. So thank you for that. As more comments are coming to the chat, I do want to mention to all of you, I mentioned, I want to bring back the kind of the process view and remind folks about, you know, where continuing opportunities. I was just mentioning the jobs report, for example. And as if you see on screen here, kind of from the left side, second from the left, the sector workshops. I know some of you have been participating in those. Looking ahead to May 5, for example, we'll be looking at the workforce development and jobs perspective, for example, at that sector-based workshop. So these are sector workshops or deep dives in the specific sectors. We've already had discussions, we've reviewed already land use and let's see, what do we read? Land use overall. And we have another one coming up next week focused on, or let's see, this week focused on transportation and next week focused on building. So, and then further ahead to jobs on May 5, for example. So, but also, so I want you to make you aware of that as well. But also, of course, again, the speaker series will bring some further outside expertise, outside of the great expertise we've been able to gather so far, to add more broader views about what's occurring elsewhere in other regions, other countries perhaps around decarbonization, so that we can continue to have a broad view of kind of the challenges and opportunities and how other areas are considering these changes. But the direct engagement in meetings and presentations as well. If you, by the way, I do want to note, if you do kind of represent a constituency, an organization, association perhaps, that you feel that some more direct engagement with your organization would be helpful, please do reach out to the team, and we'll tell you how to do that here shortly. And the RDF team can have a conversation with you about what that could look like and how that could be done. But anyway, those direct engagement meetings also include direct ongoing engagement with all of the jurisdictions here, not just within the county government, but connecting with the other cities, the other entities like the airport, the Port of San Diego, SANDAG, of course, and really having these conversations about, again, what progress can look like and how we move forward as a region. Pop-up community events, getting out to the broader community to make sure they're aware of and engaged in this process. And then looking ahead here, as you see on the far right, what we're calling the regional convenings for implementation is taking all of the work that's been produced as part of the RDF, the analysis, potential policy options, and really starting to now kind of put that all on the table with policymakers and to start talking about what are some implementation steps that our local jurisdictions can wrap their hands around and start to make progress on overall. So I wanted to give you kind of a, again, bigger picture view of what we'll be doing in terms of next steps. So, so thank you. So yeah, I again see some reference in the chat. Appreciate you weighing in related to equity. Again, thinking again about storage and wind energy generation overall. How those utilities are maintained and managed, for example. Thinking about the types of homes, smaller scale, efficient, looking for ways that we can address ongoing challenges with the unhoused homeless populations, and how can that relate to continued decarbonization efforts. So appreciate the creativity and thinking here that you're offering in the chat. Let's see, so yeah, we will be wrapping up in a few minutes here, I think, based on the level of flow and commentary we've had coming in, but so I want to just give you a heads up. If you have any kind of any perhaps last comments or questions, now's the time to bring those forward. And yes, Craig Jones, I see you here. Why don't you go ahead and you should be able to unmute. What did you want to offer here?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I'm glad you noted that we have a final opportunity here. I'm glad that tonight's discussion is especially focusing on implementation strategies, and I guess what will be chapter 8 of the report, of the draft report so far. Here's a question, I guess it's for Scott. Is there a reason why the final report can't include noting the value of transfer of development allowances? That is, making sure that in terms of land use, we transfer what are currently allowed development allowances from where the development should not be, in the backcountry, in the unincorporated areas, to where it should be in the existing urbanized areas. Transfer of development allowances can be done solely within county jurisdiction or between the county and the incorporated cities. And if we need to make changes in state law to allow that, we can do that. But can we not include transfer of development allowances as a strategy in the final report?
Scott, do you have thoughts on that? Has that been kind of explored or touched on, or do we anticipate that?
Yeah, I mean, there has been discussion about that in the region. We have heard about that. I mean, Craig, to some extent, we were starting from the premise of what what was in climate action plans. There's nothing like that in climate action plans. It would clearly, as you note, require some regional collaboration. So I think it could certainly be included in that kind of context. But yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting concept. And there's been some discussion about, there's been some preliminary discussion around the idea of transferring development rights and the emissions that go with them, right? Because if you didn't develop something and then that was developed in another jurisdiction, those emissions get transferred as well. And so that has to be incorporated into the climate action plan or some way. There has to be some way to deal with those emissions.
Okay.
So in other words, you're talking about allowing the transfer of the emissions as I'd have to think through that and make sure it wouldn't be in some way inequitable, but I'm thinking of transfer of development allowances as a way to engage our capitalistic system in getting development where it should be. And if we're, living in the system that we live in, we've got to use all the means available, appeal to those who are land banking in the backcountry, and make sure that the development that they're land banking on goes where it should go. Before we close here, there's a gentleman who could not take part in tonight's discussion, Bill Tippett. He did submit a written submittal. It's 7 pages long, but well worth reading. I hope all of the county staff reads it, but please do go through it. And I was going to quote some of the sections from it tonight, but we're running out of time. So if his 7-page submittal can be made available on the county's website for the public to read, that would be great because it's well thought out.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And we appreciate Bill's been very involved, we know. So thank you for referencing that. And actually, you're all going to see very briefly here in the chat, speaking of which, I'm glad you mentioned that, Craig. We're going to post the link to the project webpage, as well as the email address from which you may submit. There it goes right there from Joey Nielsen, about how you can submit comments, written comments, and to reach out and talk more closely with staff when on specific topics and about additional engagement opportunities. So Craig, thank you for that. And if Bill hasn't already submitted, and I know you know well how to be engaged and connect with the staff, so we appreciate that. So encourage all of you to think about that and do that. And I also want to ask, I want to bring a question back to the team. Maybe Scott, I'll start with you, but you may need to hand this to someone else. There's been a fair bit of conversation in different ways, either in the chat or mentioned just generally about pricing. Pricing our transportation system, congestion pricing, known by some, so road use, some pricing in parking, either by users or in development. There's just a lot of different ways. And Scott, maybe you can start by to what extent are pricing strategies kind of studied or addressed or considered in RDF so far? And if you're not able to answer, maybe another team member can share some.
Yeah, I would invite Nilmini Silva-Send, if she's still on the line, to maybe unmute and chime in here. I think I will say this first, that Mike mentioned that we may not want to hear from him or look at his data, and I don't think that's true. We've been taught Mike. We've been talking with Mike since the late 2000s about this, and Nilmini led the transportation piece, and there is some mention of I think parking and trading off parking and density bonuses, and so parking is definitely an important piece. Nilmini, I can't recall if, say, road pricing or something like that was included in the analysis.
I mean, like you said, we focused on what's in the climate action plans. And I know through our experience in the region that parking is not a very popular policy. However, in our sort of assessment of opportunities, we do talk about road pricing, and we will talk more about it when we look more at implementation pathways. Sandag also has a pricing policy included in their regional plan 2021. And to Mike's point, in 2009, we did address, these things are not new, parking cash out as a policy. The other thing is that City of San Diego, for example, has implemented some removal of parking minimums recently. And they do have a couple of commercial buildings where they do offer parking cash out. And by the way, California has a parking cash out law too, but it's not very successfully implemented at all. So yeah, so we've heard about it, and we'll address more pricing policies and the impacts they can have in the next phase.
Very good. All right. Thank you, Scott and Yamini. Appreciate your response to that. Because again, I wanted to just acknowledge for those of you who've been, sorry, I was unmuted. So thank you, Yamini and Scott, for doing that. And because I know there was various conversations or comments made about different aspects of pricing. So I wanted to, for everybody's benefit here, just some perspective on what has and has not been kind of addressed thus far. But I think, but let me just offer a point well taken that pricing strategies, can certainly be part of the mix of consideration for policy development and moving forward. So I want to thank all of you for those ideas overall. So again, do want to acknowledge what was posted in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and repost it here again. Again, the project webpage and the email address, the best way to get a hold of, be able to submit your comments outside of these meetings, of course, but also the project website to be able to stay on track and with upcoming events and activities when new data and reports are produced as part of this process that is ongoing. Overall, we strongly encourage you to stay tuned and tracking as new information comes forward. So good. I do want to, so I think we've probably heard from everybody tonight who wanted to weigh in. Let me ask Murtaza if you're able to chime in and let us know any other thoughts on reflections on tonight of what we've heard and thoughts about next steps before we send everybody off for the rest of their evening. Let me let you unmute yourself. Go ahead, Murtaza. You can unmute yourself now.
So thank you. I appreciate everybody for joining us tonight. It's been very informative and in-depth conversation here with the EPIC team. And we've been since January, when we initially posted the draft of the EPIC report, we've been asked about can we get into a deeper conversation with Scott and Nelmini and really help us think through what exactly the report says. So this is, once again, it's one of the many touch points. We want to have these kind of conversations in different ways, different angles. But as we move closer and closer towards implementation pathways, we need to keep this in mind as we build up on the knowledge that we're gaining. So I really appreciate you all engaging, and our next step is going to begin the process of implementation pathways.
Very good. So, but more specifically in terms of next steps of meetings and these engagements, I'll put it back up on the screen here for everybody's benefit. Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m. is our next sector workshop. So again, in-depth review on the transportation sector, I believe, right? Team, transportation sector will be in depth there. So for those of you who, and again, these sector workshops, we do really extensive review of available data so far out of this process, and are able to go into even more depth than you heard tonight on local policy in general. So if you're interested and available and want to partake and listen in on that and participate in that sector-based workshop, that is Thursday, 2 p.m. Again, please visit the project website to be able to get access to that link and to be aware of it. But 2 p.m. on Thursday is our next time to engage on that. And so I think with that, I want to just thank you all again for your active participation, sharing a lot of ideas and insights overall. And I want to thank again Elise Hansen for the overview presentation of RDF. And Scott Andrews, thanks for the in-depth review of the local policy analysis, and Murtaza being available here. Just wanted to acknowledge too, there are additional RDF and county staff and other project team members who are here. They're part of every one of these meetings, just available to support behind the scenes and help to answer questions where they can and when they can, and do a lot of day-to-day work just to keep this very significant effort moving forward. So just want to acknowledge them and thank them for their work. My colleague Joey Nielsen is here. He's been working behind the scenes of Zoom. We've been taking more detailed notes behind the scenes as well, by the way, in addition to the Zoom chat and recording. We've got a lot of redundancies here to make sure we're capturing everything being said. So I want to thank him and acknowledge him too. And so with that, let me just say thanks again. Good night. So thanks again for making the time to be here and for your continued involvement. And we'll see you at an upcoming meeting, perhaps as early as this Thursday, otherwise in the weeks and months ahead. So thanks very much, everybody. Have a great evening, and we'll see you soon. Take care.